Hey everyone, how are you doing today? Hope you're good. I know I missed yesterday, but I've had to curtail myself from some things like the Facebook chat group. I'm not going to be able to be in there a lot because between that, the YouTube comments, the emails, and then trying to research and do the videos, plus my blog, plus my family, it's just too much. So I have to, it was getting crazy, and then the mod side of it was getting really crazy where I had to be involved. I had to walk away from that part of it. I can't. So if you want to be a moderator or whatever, you're just going to have to contact a moderator in the group and they'll take care of it because I can't. I just can't. It was getting to be too much time, and I've got to cut something somewhere, and that is cut. And I'll try to stop into the group, but that's more for you guys to discuss true crime cases and stuff. And I have enough to try to keep up with the YouTube comments, which I'm never going to keep up with, frankly, and emails and things. So yeah, don't feel, again, I'm just going to say, don't feel slighted if I don't get to your comment or something. I will in due time. Okay, so today I got some of my components in. I got my monitor and I got my tower case, and tomorrow everything else is coming, and I cannot wait because I have to, what I figured out here is to go and do things, like once I get in that format, like I said, do some more live, because you see with the live, you don't have to go in and edit and upload and process all your stuff. It just shoots out there. That's why so many people like live, because they just go on live and they just go. But I still have to do research and things in order to bring you content, because I don't know. I mean, there's some people that go on live and they just, I don't know, really don't say much of anything, but I want to bring you a case, and I'll tell you the truth. Sometimes I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel so inadequate. I didn't do all this research, and there could have been more on that. But I'm too hard on myself, I think. And even if we don't get every single aspect of a case out in one video, which we're likely not going to. I mean, you can't even prepare for trial like that. So yeah, I just have to ease up on it a little bit, and even if it has to come out in a few videos, that's what we have to do. So what I've done is I've gone into, now this goes along the lines of you guys telling me about a case, me saying, I don't know about that case, and then as soon as I go into the case, I say, oh, I've heard that case. So this is the case that they made a docu-series about called The Staircase, and it's by a French filmmaker. It is on Netflix now with some added episodes because it was made in 2011, I think it was, and then they after the 2017, where they had the plea, they added 3 more episodes to the end of it, and then they put that on Netflix. I think that debuted in June. So a lot of you have seen it, which is great, because then you can discuss. We're going to go beyond the docu-series and discuss the actual facts, because any of you that have watched the docu-series probably know that there are very key factors that were not brought in there, because that docu-series was made without even the victims' families' consent or their input or anything. So it's biased towards the defendant. Okay? So we know that, but I'm going to tell you what is not in there. It's still, even with all of that, worth your time to watch it if you haven't. And, you'll start at the first episode. Now, the first episode is going to take you from the gruesome aftermath of Kathleen's death. Now, let me give you the backstory on this. This is their name is Peterson, last name is Peterson. We keep seeing these trends where these names keep coming up, right? All the Lees, now think about all the Petersons, Scott Peterson, Drew Peterson, now we have Mike Peterson. And Mike Peterson was a journalist. He has written a few books, and he had a column at one time, but he hasn't really written much in the time that this was happening, and now I'll explain about the wrongful death suit. So that's something, so we'll get into that, but let's go back to basics. Now, his life was very interesting because during this trial, he was only married to this wife since 1997, and she was murdered in 2001. She, he said, fell down a flight of stairs. Now, they lived in a very large home. It was a historic estate. It was owned, I believe it was by James Buchanan, okay? And I'll have a picture up here in the video so you can see. But a very large home in Durham, North Carolina. We're going to start with Kathleen, even though we're going to go back into his life at a prior time because there's some very interesting facts in there. So let me just take, they got married in 1997, but they had been together since 1987 is what they're saying. Something started between them. And then I think they moved in officially together in 92. And then I believe the official marriage was in 97. And she was killed December of 2001. Okay. She had one biological daughter, Caitlin. And Mike, and I'm just going to tell you, had two adopted daughters, and we'll get into that circumstance, okay? Two adopted daughters, and then he had two biological sons with his wife, Patty, who was now then his ex-wife, okay? So if we go to December 9th, 2001, let's go back to December 9th, 2001, and this happened on the back staircase of this, like I said, this historical house. So this back staircase was kind of narrow coming down, and then it had like a little side landing. It wasn't midway, it was almost at the end of the stairs, okay? So, and then it turned over, and there were like 2 or 3 steps after that. Well, she was found on that it's not really, it's a lower landing, and there was blood all over the place. Blood in ways that you would not expect to be splattered all over the walls from a fall down the stairs, okay? When Caitlin, the daughter of Kathleen Peterson, because that was the wife, Kathleen Peterson, it was Mike Peterson, it was the husband. She describes that they had a very loving relationship and that they were the most ideal parents you could ask for. And that's Kathleen's daughter, Caitlin, saying that. But there's a lot of secrets here that most people didn't know, okay? Some people did know some of the secrets. Most people didn't, and a lot of them came out as big shockers at the trial. So they have this gracious home in Durham, North Carolina. You have Kathleen, who was always, into decorating her home for Christmas. She was always starting super early. She loved to cook. She loved to entertain. She had a lot of stress, though, at this time because her company was going through a lot of financial problems. All of the children were out of the house, okay? They were either in college, or moved on. So they were empty nesters in this huge house, and they really were looking forward to having a big Christmas get-together again and having everyone in this house, loud and rambunctious voices, that kind of thing. Now, Michael's girls actually brought him and Kathleen together because they were friends with Caitlin, his 2 adopted daughters, okay? So they were playing in 1987, then they all moved in together, and Caitlin remembers that. She said, They sat me down and said, how would you like it if Martha and Margaret, those are the 2 daughters, come and live with you? And she said she immediately thought it was going to be like a permanent sleepover. And her mother told her that, in the beginning, that this is going to be our family. The couple thrived. Michael by then was a full-time novelist. And he received more than a $500,000 advance from his publisher for one of his books set in Vietnam. And Michael had been in combat himself in Vietnam, so you write about what you know, and that's what he was writing about. Later on, he would write a sharp-edged column on city politics for the local paper. Now, Kathleen was a Duke engineering graduate. She was a goal-oriented businesswoman who became a rising star at Nortel, which was a telecommunications company. And she was making about $150,000 a year back then. So she was this super mom throwing herself into this full-time executive career, juggling all of these children, soccer and kids, charities, the arts, her husband, and all of that. She was, into everything. And Michael's brother said he could see the difference that Kathleen made in Michael after his first marriage to Patty fizzled out. And Bill Peterson is his brother, and he said, I think she was spontaneous, Kathleen. She was a lot of fun, and she had a tremendous sense of humor. Caitlin said it was really easy to just kind of fall into amazement with this kind of person that could keep you entertained and laughing. But she does remember that it wasn't all a sitcom laugh track going on there, that the parents would have some real screamers, as she says, these arguments, but they were over quickly and they would move on. They would blow over and they'd move on, okay? In 1992 is when they bought this 14-room dream home on Cedar Street, and 5 years later, they got married. As time passed, all of their friends, remarked about what a happy couple they were and what a great family they had. Kathleen was signing on to raise Michael's 4 children, along with her own daughter. However, as that Christmas approached, we see that Longo, remember the Longo? There was Christmas approaching there too. And I think a lot of times, as we're going to see, there's debt involved in these situations. And we know that that's probably one of the key things that couples fight about, right, is financial things. Now, it's not only debt, it's just financial things in general. If you have somebody that's a spender and the other one's a saver, you're going to have issues. That's one of the main things that couples fight about is finances. But then if you add debt to that, and then you add things like Christmas, when people need to spend money and you're already in debt, and who knows, I'm not saying people get murdered, but we're seeing that trend, right, in these domestic murders. There's debt, there's finances, there's normally to adultery, and we're going to see that here too, but in a little bit of a different way. So we have Christmas coming, and all the kids away at college. Kathleen was really jittery because she was having a lot of problems, I told you, with her job, okay? Things were getting really bad. People were getting laid off, and it was just really, really bad. So that financial boom was now bust, and Nortel stock was tanking fast. Thousands at her company were being let go, and Kathleen thought she's going to be next. So you know how that is going to mess with you if that's happening. You feel like you're on the brink of losing your job. Her income was very, very important to this family. So she was a jittery mess. She ended up taking Valium to calm herself down. Her daughter, Caitlin, says, I think more than anything, it was devastating. She threw her life into that company. And it wasn't just work that was stressing her out. She had to lay off her own boss. Michael had been through some rough times too. A few years back, he ran for mayor. Michael had gone through some tough times too. A few years back, he had run for mayor. And he had been caught publicly in a lie, which was really embarrassing. He was embellishing his combat history in Vietnam, and he was caught on that lie. And his brother explains it, Bill, Mike's brother, says it's just a bit of a lie that starts to exponentially grow over a period of time, and there's nothing you can do about it. It got out of control. Still, just that past fall, he picked himself up. He ran for local office again, city council, and he lost. No question, the autumn of 2001 had been a tense one. So on December 8th, with Kathleen dreading morning conference call with the Home Office and likely more bad news, it was Michael who suggested an afternoon of Christmas shopping and a couple of bottles of wine later to put a cheery glow on the evening. Now, when asked how much Michael and Kathleen drink, Caitlin, her daughter, said, "My mom loved to party. She was a happy person. She'd have a glass of wine and start drinking to calm her nerves." She said they were not sloppy drinkers, but that's not to say she didn't drink a lot. Now, that night of the 8th, they ate some dinner, they watched a video, and they celebrated the good news that Hollywood was nibbling at the rights to Michael's most recent book. But what happened after, we can just speculate on. We know for certain that Kathleen took a call from a coworker at 11 p.m. and just perhaps she was waiting by the computer for an email to come through from that coworker. Michael's story is that they were sitting out by the pool and she went inside and he smoked a pipe, so he stayed out a little longer, he said, to have a smoke. Kathleen had said she was going to go up to bed. Now the next thing is he goes in the house and finds Kathleen lying at the bottom of the stairs gushing blood, and he makes this 911 call. It's a frantic 911 call.
911, where's your emergency?
Cedar Street, please.
What's wrong?
My wife had an accident. She's still breathing.
What kind of accident?
She's down on the stairs. She's still breathing. Please come.
Is she conscious?
What?
Is she conscious?
No, she's not conscious.
Okay.
Please.
How many stairs did you fall down?
Huh?
How many stairs?
Stairs.
How many stairs? Calm down, sir. Calm down.
No, 15, 20, I don't know. Please, get somebody here right away, please.
Okay, somebody's dispatching the ambulance while I ask you questions.
It's in Forest Hills, okay? Please, please.
Okay, sir, somebody else is dispatching the ambulance. Okay, is she awake now? Hello?
By the time Caitlin heard the news from her college roommate, it was much worse than a dreadful fall. She said that her roommate looked her straight in the eye and she said, "Caitlin, it's your mom. She's dead." Well, her roommate should, I don't know, I think they could have got somebody with a little more tact to give her the news. That's kind of harsh. Yikes. Okay. As is with any sudden death, the police were summoned to the house, and Detective Art Holland said he received a page around approximately 3 o'clock in the morning that there was a death investigation. And so when he got to the Peterson home, he encountered a ghastly scene. A 48-year-old woman lying dead in a pool of blood splayed out on the floor. Her head was resting on the landing on a back staircase. The arriving paramedics and police officers thought they'd been called to a scene of an accident, but there was so much blood everywhere. Nobody expected the amount of blood that was there, because when you think of a fall down the stairs, you're not thinking blood, right? But there was blood all over the place. There was blood on Kathleen. There was blood up the stairwell walls, smeared, really high on the stairwell walls. And it just didn't look like anything they had seen. And they immediately could not rule out any foul play with this, because it was just bizarre, all this blood, right? So that's when they called in Detective Holland from the homicide unit to see what he thought. And he said, "This does not look like an accident. Sorry, I'm not buying this. This doesn't look like an accident." Michael Peterson is there barefoot in bloody shorts, okay? And he's just standing nearby. The officers had seen him cradling his wife's body, and that he had to be pulled away from his wife. So he's got blood all over his shorts. It's saturated in. They brought them into the courtroom, and they're just like these khaki shorts that are just saturated with blood. And so Detective Holland said he identified who it was. It was Mike Peterson. He shook his hand, and he told him that I'm very sorry for the loss, but that it appeared that the scene looked suspicious and it needed to be processed. When asked if he was helpful at this point, when he was told that, Detective Holland says no. He was pretty much very quiet and he kept to himself. He didn't say a whole lot. And the police videotaped the scene as the officers found it. Michael Peterson's tennis shoes and socks were by the foot of the body. White towels soaked red with blood from the dead woman's grievous injury to the back of her head. Blood smears up the oak staircase and on the walls above. Detective Holland called for a crime scene analysis and an expert in blood splatter. The technician made his measurements, and the story revealed to him by the blood put the supposed accidental fall on Cedar Street in a whole new light. Detective Holland said, he told me he felt strongly that this was a homicide that they were looking at, not an accident. So for the next 20 hours, officers meticulously photographed and documented what they now regarded as a crime scene. Blood outside the walkway, blood stains on the front door, the blood on the kitchen sink, a wine bottle and glasses on the counter. Every inch of this 3-acre property was combed. They were surely looking for a murder weapon as well. So this suspicious death of Kathleen Peterson made the news, okay? The family gathered in grief, unaware that even more sorrow was headed its way. In mid-February, 2 months after Kathleen's death, the medical examiner released her autopsy report with back of the skull photographs. This is very key to this now, because they indicated blunt force trauma. Okay? She had 7 deep lacerations on her scalp. So they found that she had been bludgeoned to death. Not long after, Michael was charged with first-degree murder. Conviction for him would mean life in prison. Now, Peterson adamantly denied he did not kill his wife, okay? Peterson's 4 children and stepdaughter Caitlin were by his side. They believed wholeheartedly in their father's innocence. Now, when this trial began in July of 2003, you see how long it takes to get ready for that trial, the prosecutor, Jim Harden, said that he was going to tell the jury a story of a husband that killed his wife in a perfect storm of domestic tension. A crime fueled, he argued, by money worries and sexual secrets. You see, this is more than just a mistress, what's going to come out here. Okay, Jim Harden said, these are his words, "I am representing Kathleen because she is not going to be able to tell anybody what happened, and we are her voice." He went on to say that Kathleen's death was caused by a tragic accident, fall down the stairs and their home. And he said that they say, on the other hand, that she died a horrible, painful death at the hands of her husband, Michael Peterson. So the state began its mostly circumstantial case with testimony from the police and the paramedics that were summoned to the scene. The Assistant District Attorney Frida Black did the questioning. And this woman sounds so much like Nancy Grace, and Nancy Grace is on this documentary. So every time, if I was writing something when I was listening to the documentary, I would think it was Nancy Grace again. I'm like, oh, it's not. It's not. It's the Assistant District Attorney Frida Black. So she asked one of the paramedics, "What looked suspicious to you?" And the paramedic said, "One, I had a deceased person there, and then there was a large amount of blood. That doesn't look consistent with someone falling down the steps." When you see, if you've seen the blood, I mean, you can, I think any lay person, anyone can tell that it's not consistent with a fall down the steps. Too much blood, the first responders thought, for a fall on a wooden staircase, but just as puzzling, the blood on and around the victim was mostly dry. They said the blood had coagulated, it was dry, and all of that business. Okay, so dried blood meant to the paramedics that the victim had been lying on the staircase for a while before the 911 call came in at around 2:40 a.m. Now, Jim Harden said We have contended all along that the attack probably occurred around midnight, or maybe even a little bit earlier. The dried blood was one sign to investigators that time had elapsed before the husband called for help. But there was something else found later in lab tests, a kind of biological clock and marker. Injuries discovered in Kathleen's brain had produced something called red neurons. Okay? And Hardin says for these red neurons to develop, she has to have an ischemic event, which means lack of oxygen to the brain for at least a 2-hour period. So they knew that she didn't die right away, okay, with all of this evidence. Essentially, she bled to death, okay? So it raised an unanswered question. If Kathleen Peterson is slowly dying for 2 hours at the bottom of the stairs, where is Michael Peterson all this time? The prosecution also called the first police investigator that arrived at the house. The officer testified he saw red flags indicating foul play right away. Notably, the way Kathleen's body came to rest all too neatly. So Detective Borden said, in his experience, very rarely, I don't think I've ever seen a serious fall where the neck was in complete alignment with the spinal cord. Then there was what some thought of as an odd behavior from the husband. A veteran crime scene technician testified he remembered his first glimpse of Michael Peterson bursting through the patio door covered in blood. And the crime scene technician said he was moaning, and he ran through the home over to Mrs. Peterson's body, and then he put his arms around her, and he was still sobbing. Okay? So he ran through this patio door covered in blood, and then he runs over to his wife, he grabs her, and he's sobbing into her, okay? The prosecutor contends this was all his melodramatic acting, and it was a way for Peterson to account for any blood he had on himself, right? And on her and all of that, right? To get in there, get his DNA on her, get her blood all over him, and all of that business. A whole bunch of these little things are going on there, and they're asking, what's up with this guy? Something's not right here. So Hardin said the scene didn't make any sense, and it doesn't square with the story. Like we said, it doesn't add up. Okay? It doesn't add up. That could be my catchphrase. It doesn't add up. Okay, officers called by the prosecution noted other incongruities. The husband's sneakers and bloody socks. Why had he taken them off? His wife's dying, and he's concerned about messing up the house. Okay. That's like Chris. That's like Chris Watts, right? His kids and his wife are missing, and he wants to clean up the house and put sheets on the bed and do laundry and vacuum instead of being out canvassing for his missing wife and kids. And how did one of those same sneakers leave a bloody footprint on the back side of his dead wife's sweatpants, the side facing the floor? There was testimony from other prosecution witnesses that Peterson had tried to clean a large stain of blood off of the front of his shorts. And other details on the kitchen counter, police saw a bottle of wine and 2 glasses neatly arranged, implying perhaps the couple had passed a relaxing evening at home sipping wine together. The problem with that cozy image, according to the prosecution, was that his dead wife's fingerprints weren't on either of the glasses. The prosecutor argued that Peterson had prominently set out the bottle and glasses to suggest that Kathleen had had too much to drink and had tumbled down the stairs inebriated. It was all about staging the scene, is what they felt. In fact, the medical examiner found that Kathleen's blood alcohol level was so low she could have passed a roadside breathalyzer test. They thought to themselves, hey, is this writer of fiction making up his own story to cover up this murder? Is he staging it so it looks like an accident? And the cops weren't buying it. So when asked about what kind of weapon it could have been that could have inflicted this damage, they said that it was a Blo-poke that was seen in that home on many occasions, a Blo-poke. This is so funny. I have never heard it called a Blo-poke, but what a Blo-poke is, it's like a fireplace poker, but it has it's hollow. It's made of brass and it's hollow, and you can blow, so it works like a bellows, and a poker at the same time. I don't know. You might have to be in another tax bracket to have a Blo-poke, because I think they were like, just the Blo-poke, I believe is like close to $90 back then. I have a fireplace poker. But yeah, so it became kind of a joke, this Blo-poke, okay? And they were even trying to make OJ type slogans like Johnny Cochran did, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. And they were trying to find one, it got no Blo-poke, so I forget, they were laughing through this whole documentary, and really, with his defense team. Okay, so it is this Blo-poke that, ironically, where the Blo-poke came from? Kathleen's sister, Candace, had purchased this Blo-poke, I think for herself, and liked it so much that she went out and bought them for her sister, and I think her other sister. She bought a few of them, okay? So, that goes along the line. My mother used to always say, don't buy anybody knives for their bridal shower. And I'm like, why? Just like, because if they kill anybody with those knives, you'll feel guilty. And I'm thinking, like, how many people do you know that you go to their bridal shower and they kill one another with them? She had this thing. I don't know. It was so crazy. She would not buy cutlery or anything like that for a bridal shower. She's just like, no, because if they kill someone, they're going to kill someone. But yeah, and that stuck with me ever since. It's crazy that I'm like, how would you, was that, oh, she killed him? Yeah. Was it the knife set that I gave them? I don't know. This is thing my mother had. It was crazy. But yeah, nobody wants to hear that the gift that they gave, killed someone. But these Blo-pokes are going to make a big deal in this case because they couldn't find the Blo-poke, okay? So the prosecutor says, did you have the occasion to see it in her home at, oh, okay. So the Blo-poke's a metal fireplace tool, like I told you. It's identical to the one the prosecutor showed the jury. So the prosecutor brought a sample of one in, okay? He showed it to the jury. He shows it to Kathleen's sister on the stand. And he asks her about it. She says that it had been a gift. This is Kathleen's sister Candace testifying. And then the prosecutor says, did you have the occasion to see this Blo-poke in her home at various times when you visited? And Candace says, yes, it was always in the kitchen. I used it. I observed Kathleen use it. It was always in the kitchen. Not sure why you would keep a Blo-poke in the kitchen and not by the fireplace, but okay. In the kitchen, by the back staircase, but search as they may, the police could never find this Blo-poke. So now, where is this Blo-poke, right? And how could he hide this with the police all around him if this is indeed the murder weapon? Prosecution says, you've got to realize he had several hours. Remember when they said her body had the blood that was drying, coagulating, clotting, and that she probably was there for 2 hours before that 911 call came in? So they believe that it was during that time that he was out hiding, burying, whatever, this murder weapon. And they believe that is why there was blood on the front door and blood on the walkway. That was when he went out to discard, get rid of, bury, whatever, the murder weapon. Prosecution argues that someone had to go outside at some point to get that blood out there. Now, in the end, the state's case is all about accounting for blood and how it got there. The state's blood splatter expert told the jury he was certain Kathleen Peterson had been beaten to death because the droplet patterns of blood and spray on the steps and walls of the stairwell were just what you would expect if you were taking a weapon, rising, so he said, and striking like this. And he said it would cast the blood off, it would go up the wall with each blow, and that's that was going to account for this blood all over the place. And the expert said the blood found on the inside lower leg of Peterson's shorts confirms his theory. The blood found on the inside back of his right pant leg, they said he couldn't get that blood there by cradling her or trying to give her any help. It could only come from someone like straddling her and striking her. And the blood is coming up and hitting the inside part of the shorts. Now, what's more, the prosecution's blood expert said he saw evidence of an attempt to clean up some of the blood on the stairwell. A scrub-down stair step was especially chilling because technicians found drops of fresh blood on top of the smudged cleanup. And does that mean there were 2 stages of this lethal assault? So the prosecutor Hardin says she was probably down during at least a portion of that time and then became conscious again, where he had to initiate a second round of assault on her, and then the blood splatter is on that cleanup. So he started to clean up a little bit, and then she came to, is what they're saying, and then he had to, pummel her some more to kill her. So everything came down to this medical examiner's testimony. It was a very crucial part of the trial, and there were gruesome autopsy photos shown. And the prosecutor asked the medical examiner if he ever recalled a case where someone fell down the steps and there were multiple lacerations, as there were in Kathleen. And the medical examiner said no, he's never seen that. The medical examiner said there were 7 tears on the scalp, so deep that they went right down into the skull. And he said there were bruises on her face and hands, and they were signs of defense. So she was trying to shield herself, and that's where those came from. She struggled, and it wasn't a fall, is what he thinks looking at this evidence. The medical examiner said, in his opinion, the injuries result of being struck by an object or having the head struck against an object. And the prosecutor asked him, were you able to determine, in your opinion, what the manner of her death was? And the medical examiner said, yes, I was. Prosecutor asked, what was it? And the examiner said, in my opinion, the manner of death in this case is homicide. It was this ghastly murder on the back staircase. What was the motive for this murder? What happened in that house that night that caused this? The state said that motive could be found inside a checkbook and inside a computer hard drive. Okay? Hold on to your seats if you don't know this story. The jury was about to meet Brad. Yeah, this is one of Michael Peterson's little secrets. And the prosecutor said, in a very real sense, this case is about pretense and appearances. It's about things not being as they seem. And this is the same kind of thing we're seeing all along, right? Things are really not what they seem. We know that. And we're seeing it more and more as we study these cases, that things are not what they seem, especially in these family murders. People are not what they seem. The domestic bliss is not what it seems. And there's some really twisted secrets lying here. And this one has some really tough stuff. And I think when you look at the stuff that came out now, and what the jury had to read, when you see them reading what they had to read, I think that's really tipped the case for them. But let's see. So the prosecution, through its crime scene and forensic evidence, had described a violent confrontation between the novelist and his executive wife on the back staircase of their $1 million home. Michael Peterson was accused of savagely bashing his wife in the head with a fireplace tool, and then bludgeoning her again as she regained consciousness. Blood splattered everywhere. The medical examiner had testified to horrific lacerations to Kathleen Peterson's scalp. And now the prosecution is going to tell the court why the murder happened. A contributing factor, according to the prosecutor, was money. Despite appearances, the Petersons were cash poor, living month to month on vapors. They had $143,000 of credit card debt. And they were essentially living on plastic. They had 3 children in top-ranked private universities. And his books, his income was only piddling in royalties. They were getting by on Kathleen's monthly salary, and a big chunk of that was deferred for taxes. What's more, her job was tenuous at best. And that's why she was freaking, right? Because he's not earning, he's not earning anything but pittance from his royalties. He doesn't have, he's got that Hollywood, what they said, that Hollywood book, who knows if that's even real, who knows if he didn't even throw that in to boost up his ego a little bit. But they're depending on her salary, and they've got 3 kids in private universities, tuition, right? They've got this huge house. She's got to pay taxes on that, $150,000, and that's it. I mean, and they have $143,000 in credit card debt. If Kathleen died from an accident, guess what? Her company insurance policy would pay Michael, the beneficiary, about $1.8 million. Could that be a motive? Mike Peterson, the creative thinker, the writer of fiction, was able to figure out the perfect solution. The solution was to make it appear that Catherine fell down those stairs. Checkbook problems may have been the gasoline to the murder, but the state theorized that something else was the match. It wasn't a storybook marriage. It wasn't monogamous. And they believe that was the trigger that evening. The trigger, according to prosecutor, just may have to do with Michael Peterson's sexuality, a desire for men. The other man was about to be a sensational revelation in this trial. Though Peterson's brother thinks it shouldn't be a shock to anyone that really knows his brother Michael Peterson. Bill Peterson said, "I've known about my brother's sexual orientation since I was a teenager." According to Peterson's brother, Michael Peterson is and always has been bisexual. But they asked him if his wife Kathleen had known that Mike was bisexual. And they asked her daughter, and Caitlin said, "I genuinely cannot believe that she could know anything about that. I know from every value that she's taught me, from the way I was raised, that's not something that she would have been willing to accept." And on the night of the murder, the prosecutor believed Kathleen stumbled upon something explosive on the Peterson home computer. Downloaded images of naked men, 2,000 of them. Prosecutor Hardin said there were liaisons outside the marriage that Kathleen didn't know about, and there were a series of email exchanges between Michael Peterson and a local male prostitute that he found through the internet. His name was Brad, a 26-year-old former soldier. His website pic was a come-hitter beefcake pose complete with dog tags. The college student bragged about his endowments and pitched himself as a clean-cut jock masculine. "I am definitely dominant." The assistant DA quizzed a confident, upbeat Brad on the stand. "What type of services did you perform?" And Brad says, "Oh well, that's pretty broad. Basically, it's companionship for other males of legal age." Prosecutor said, "Did that involve sexual activity?" And Brad said, "Sometimes it does." Prosecutor said, "What type of sexual activity, sir?" And he said, "Oh, just about everything under the sun." So here was the state's motive for murder, right? The prosecutor arguing that Michael Peterson killed in a rage after being confronted about this sexual secret and dalliance with a male prostitute. Brad told the court that Peterson had first contacted him by email in August of 2001, 4 months before the murders. Brad said, "I think it was just conversations back and forth on an email correspondence, trying to get to know me a little bit better and a little bit of friendly jabbing at me." Prosecutor said, "You all contacted each other back and forth approximately how many times by way of the computer?" Brad said, "I'm guessing about 20 different emails, by either myself or in person." And the prosecutor said, "Did you discuss anything other than getting to know each other?" They really did. I can't even read you the emails, but you can go online and see them. And just imagine how this jury, which a lot of them look like very conservative people, they were flabbergasted reading this. As far as I recall, it was basically the same as many other clients who would contact me. They want to get to know me about my life, and they want to be safe. So they want to get to know me to make sure that I'm a straight guy. The prosecutor says, "Did you send him a picture of yourself?" And he says, "Yes, ma'am, I did." For what purpose? And Brad said, "Usually anyone who is contacting me likes to know what they're getting." The prosecutor showed jurors a steamy collection of emails that Michael Peterson had sent Brad in the weeks leading up to the proposed rendezvous. "You have great reviews, and I would like to get together. I've never done escort, but used to pay to F, a super macho guy who played lacrosse. I'm very bi, and that's all there is to it." That was part of Michael's email, the most tame part. According to the prosecutor, by late summer 2001, 4 months before Kathleen's death, Michael Peterson, the action war novelist and former Marine, had agreed to get with Brad, another former military man, for sex at the Peterson home. Brad said, "We were to hook up, I believe, on September 5th, 2001. Prosecutor: During your conversations with Mr. Peterson, did you all actually even discuss a price for your services? And Brad says, I believe we did. Prosecutor said, and what was the price you quoted him? Brad says, I believe it was $150 an hour. Prosecutor said, okay, was that your normal price that you would have for most of your clients? And he said, in the beginning of my short career, yes. Prosecutor said, the prostitution career? And Brad says, I do prefer to call it an escort. Prosecutor said, escort, I am sorry. Okay. Prosecutor said, did you all have any type of communication, whether it be by computer or by phone, and how it was that you were going to hook up together without his wife knowing it? And Brad says, I don't remember any discussions about whether his wife would know or not know. It may have been in those emails, but I don't recall any of that. This was absolutely humiliating testimony for not only Michael, but his family, his children that were in the courtroom. Even Kathleen's sisters knew nothing of this. Caitlin, the daughter, knew nothing of this. So this was so humiliating for his sweatiest secrets to be tumbling out of the closet like this in the courtroom. And yet, when he sat in court, he just had this unreadable mask on him, this poker face. He didn't seem to be bothered in the least by it. The prosecutor said, did you actually discuss what you were going to do when you were to get together on September 5th, 2001? And Brad said, yes, ma'am. And the prosecutor said, what were you all planning on doing? And he said, having sex. But Brad told the court when the appointed day came around, he was tired and he canceled the sexual tryst. The prosecutor said, so you just simply didn't contact him back at all? And Brad said, I do not think I contacted him that night. I have found out that I have contacted him about 25 days later to apologize for not showing up. So that was like ghosting him, but then he came back 25 days later. After you contacted him to apologize for not showing up, did you have any further communication with him? Brad said, no, ma'am. She said, why not? He said, I believe he did not email me back. Brad testified that he and Peterson had never met until here in court. For the prosecutor, the Brad episode showed a couple of things: that the marriage of Kathleen and Michael was anything but rock solid. And as important was the trail of email messages that resulted the trigger the state talked about. Now, if you read those emails, it's pretty plain about what they intended to do. But it's not only that. When you read these emails, he is talking to this guy, Brad, and he's talking about this guy he knows that films military guys pleasuring themselves in all kinds of situations. And he says that he let this guy that has this website and this resort, which he's giving Brad all these websites for this resort and everything. And he's telling him, oh, there's lots of great pictures on there. You go on that website, and then you can go on this one, and you can pay $5 for 3 days. You should really do that. It's really worth it. They've got a lot of great stuff on there, and real military guys, and he's going on and on about that. So if you're interested in that, you could read the emails. But the emails were incriminating because it wasn't just that Brad was this only person. He said that things he had done in the past, he was telling Brad in these emails, including being filmed pleasuring himself all over a velvet couch at this guy's, I guess, his resort. I don't know. Yeah, and then they have a whole bunch of sites that he would visit on a regular basis, and lots of stuff they got from the computer. So Hardin said, when asked if Kathleen, if the prosecution knew, when the prosecution was asked if they thought Kathleen had any knowledge of this or accepted this in her marriage, Hardin said none. He didn't think she had any whatsoever, and she had already been through a previous marriage where infidelity was an issue, and she wouldn't tolerate it. And why would she tolerate it now? So there was that trigger for this murder, and she must have found something out about this lifestyle that caused it. So they think that she was on the computer, saw that, and it started an altercation that caused this, and everybody was already on edge with the money issue. So, yeah. Now, back to the night of the death, the prosecutor sets this as a theory for what happened. They say after an innocuous evening at home, Kathleen takes that call, right, from that coworker, and then she was going to go look for that email, remember? So she's on the home computer looking for the email that was regarding her business morning meeting. So idling on the computer waiting, so she's searching around, and I guess she came across an open file with email messages with Brad the prostitute, or as he likes to be called, the escort. There was also, not only that, in the desk drawer there was a printout of that message in the desk drawer. So whichever she saw, the state believes this is what was the whole catalyst that very night. And they believe that Kathleen, got up and lit into Michael about this secret life, confronted him about it, and from that point they can surmise what happened, right? So there it was, the prosecution's case for conviction, blood evidence, odd behavior by the defendant at the crime scene, money issues, and the trigger, the violent confrontation between husband and wife that resulted when a secret homosexual appetite was exposed. And not a bit of all that made sense the defense was about to tell the jury. We have to think that confrontation there on that back staircase, was it the violent culmination of a perfect storm of domestic stress, as the prosecution argued, or was it something more mundane? Something unfortunate, but perfectly understandable. Defense attorney said the truth is that Kathleen Peterson, after drinking wine and champagne, and after taking some Valium, tried to walk up a narrow, poorly lit stairway in flip-flops. And she fell and she bled to death. Dave Rudolph, the lead defense attorney, said in his mind, this was a case about reasonable doubt. Dave Rudolph was now putting on his case, telling the jury that Kathleen's death, gory as the pictures may be, was a simple fatal accident. Nothing else made sense. In Rudolph's words, well, I think there's no doubt that the weakest part of the state's case was motive. Despite the prosecution's portrayal of Michael Peterson as a closeted bisexual, the defense argued the Petersons were an extraordinarily happy couple. Rudolph said that everywhere they went, people noticed Michael. And they noticed him looking at Kathleen with that kind of pride that you just can't fake. And money problems? Hardly, he said. Contrary to being on the brink of financial disaster, the couple's net worth, assets minus debits, was a tidy pile. The state's financial analyst admitted as much in a cross-examination by a member of the defense team. So the defense said the idea that Peterson would have killed his wife to collect the insurance money didn't make sense. It wasn't about money. Then what about the prosecution's theory that a violent confrontation took place after Kathleen stumbled upon her husband's email solicitation of a male prostitute? To be sure, no defense attorney welcomes a problem like Brad, but Rudolph tried to undo the damage by the escort in his cross-examination, first by getting the prostitute to say that contact with men like Peterson was far from unusual. So Rudolph asks the male escort, "Was that an unusual occurrence for you to have or plan to have sexual relations with married men?" Brad says, "To the contrary. I mean, married men are in the majority of most of the clients that I saw when I was an escort." And Rudolph said, "With regards to the kind of men that you tended to have escort relationships with, can you give us some indication as to the professions, for example?" And Brad says, "Sure. Usually they are professionals because my fees were quite high." He said, "I saw doctors, attorneys, one judge," and the judge says, "It was not this judge," and there was laughter in the courtroom. Remember, the prosecution theorized that the discovery of steamy emails between Peterson and Brad was likely what triggered the violent confrontation between the writer and his wife. And now the defense wanted the jury to think about this from the other way around. Okay, they say that maybe Kathleen did know about her husband's bisexuality but didn't push him on it. A domestic don't ask, don't tell policy, maybe they had that at home. And if so, there went the state's trigger theory. Rudolph asked him, "Did a number of the men, the married men, that you had sexual relations with have wives that knew they were bisexual?" And Brad says, "I believe most of them did from my experience." And Rudolph said, "In your experience, was it unusual for a wife married to a bisexual man to know that he was bisexual?" And Brad said, "No, not at all." Rudolph said, "Was it unusual for a bisexual man using your services to be in a happy marriage?" And Brad said, "No, not at all. Most of the men who would see me would have their time with me and then go back to their happy, healthy lives." And the male prostitute, he wants to be called an escort, added it would all be physical. No romantic or emotional entanglements involved or allowed. Rudolph asked, "Was there any kind of personal relationship involved between you and Michael Peterson?" And Brad said, "No, sir." Then he went on to say, "No, sir. I believe it was one of the emails. It was very explicit that there would be no emotions involved, no personal relationships involved. It would be strictly physical." So did Kathleen know about her husband's bisexuality or not? If she was aware and tolerated this, then there went the prosecution's so-called trigger, right? The flashpoint for its fatal confrontation that night. That whole scenario's right out the window. What do you guys think? Do you think Kathleen knew about her husband's bisexual tendencies, or do you think that played into the trigger for that evening? Let me know. So now let's go on. The defense argued Peterson certainly wasn't going out of his way to hide flirtation with Brad. Jurors were shown the household telephone bill, which was in Kathleen's name. And there on the September 2001 statement were 3 short telephone calls to Fayetteville, North Carolina, to Brad's number. If this were all secret and shameful activity, why would Peterson have used his home phone so openly to make these calls? So Rudolph says, "Show me one piece of evidence, one person who says that Kathleen was upset because Mike was bisexual, or Kathleen was upset because Michael was seeing other people outside of the marriage." Not one shred of evidence, not one. The defense even used the male prostitute as an unlikely witness to the strength of the Peterson marriage. Rudolph asked him, "Did Michael Peterson ever do or say anything on that phone or by email that indicated that he was not in love with Kathleen Peterson?" And Brad said, "To the contrary. In his emails, unlike most of my clients, he indicated that he had a great relationship. Most clients don't want to say anything about the relationship. He said he had a warm relationship with his wife and nothing would ever destroy that." The defense showed the jury Peterson's own words in an email to Brad. And this is what Mike Peterson wrote in an email to Brad. He said, "I am married, very happily married with a dynamite wife." Rudolph said, "Why would someone in an email like that say something like that if it wasn't coming from the heart?" So in my mind, that's as credible a statement as you're going to get about how he really felt about Kathleen. And then Rudolph went on to say, "Now, consider that Michael Peterson and Brad the prostitute never did get together. The defense raised doubts as to whether Peterson really intended to follow through on the sex date with Brad, if it were just a sexual fantasy. The defense argued that there was even less of a motive for murder. So he said, on September 30th, you sent him an email. Brad said, yes, I did. And Rudolph said, and you explained in that email why you hadn't come up to meet him? And he said, yes. And he said, and he didn't respond to that email. And Brad said, no, he didn't. And Rudolph said, are there some percentage of people that you have email correspondence with that never just hook up with you for one reason or another? And Brad said, that happens quite a bit. Rudolph said, sometimes they're more interested in the communication than the meeting. And Brad said, certainly, a lot of guys are interested in hooking up, but others just want to get to know a military man and find out about him and get information about me, and it never goes beyond cyberspace. And Rudolph asked him, after that email on 9/30/2001 that you sent to him, did you ever have any further contact with Michael Peterson? And Brad said, no, sir. And then Rudolph said, sir, do you know anything about the death of Kathleen Peterson? And Brad said, I know diddly. He said that, I know diddly. With Brad stepping down from the stand, the defense now had to take on the Mount Everest of the case. All the forensics, accounting for all of the blood and those appalling injuries. For the defense, as for the prosecution, this case would rise or fall on how persuasively it accounted for all the blood and the deep lacerations in Kathleen's head. Defense attorney Rudolph countered the state's medical examiner with an expert of their own, a neuropathologist. He noted that he didn't see any skull or bone fractures. Dave Rudolph, lead defense attorney, asked, were there any fractures of the skull, any facial bones, mandible, any bony structures of the face? And the expert says, none reported, no. Rudolph said, or the hands or the arms? No, the expert said. Rudolph asked, any of the common injuries one sees in a beating death? No. The defense expert said everything pointed to an accident and not murder. The expert went on to say Kathleen Peterson's injuries were the result of a fall and not the result of a beating. Rudolph said if someone is beating someone over the head with a blunt object, you're trying to inflict maximum damage and you're going to get a brain contusion, you're going to get a skull fracture, and there weren't any here. And to drive that point home, the defense lawyers took the jurors on a field trip to the house, to the back staircase where they hoped jurors would see it was too narrow to freely swing a longish murder weapon like a fireplace tool. Rudolph said it is impossible to conceive of Michael Peterson beating Kathleen Peterson to death with a Blo-poke or anything else for that matter in that stairway. Not a beating, an accident, said the defense. And to help the jurors envision the way Kathleen may have died, the defense hired a body motion expert to describe a likely accidental plunge. First, the expert said, forget about the stairway falls in the movie, like this particularly dramatic one staged in the film Dolores Claiborne. In real life, the expert claimed, people don't take a spill that way. To help jurors imagine how a woman in flip-flops, medicated with Valium, maybe tipsy, with drink, might have fallen, the body motion expert showed an animation he had made. In it, Kathleen climbs the stairs to go to bed, and she suddenly loses her balance and falls backwards from the 4th step, hitting her head on the molding, cutting open a nasty wound to her scalp. And stunned, she tries to get up. But she slips in a puddle of blood now and falls again, doomed now to bleed out. Dave Rudolph, defense attorney, says, what we had to overcome were the pictures and the blood. That was very clear from the beginning. And to account for the blood splatter, the spray that the state's analyst said resulted from Michael Peterson striking his wife over and over with a blunt object. Defense attorney, at this time they would like to call Dr. Henry Lee to the stand. You're probably familiar with Dr. Henry Lee, right? He was also just in the making a murderer with the blood evidence there. You've probably seen him in that and other things, in other cases, right? The OJ case to be probably his most famous case. Dr. Lee explained this blood spatter in a theatrical manner. He swigged a small amount of ketchup He took a deep breath and then he spit it out. Replicating, he said, the victim of the fall coughing up blood, staggering about the stairwell in a daze. Dr. Lee said at the scene, the injured person can be walking. They can move, they can shake their head, they can move their arms and step forward. The result, blood spatter up the wall of the staircase and on the inside leg of Peterson's shorts as he tended to her, making the stain the prosecution's thought so damning. Obviously, the blood all around was due to her being alive and moving around for the same period of time. Couldn't that also be consistent with the state's theory that Peterson attacked her once, she revived, and he had to attack her again? Now, you might think, well, couldn't that be consistent with the prosecution's theory that Peterson attacked her and then had to attack her again because she came to? And Rudolph said, well, but that makes no sense. If you're going to kill somebody, then you finish it off. And whereas the prosecution said there was too much blood to be explained by a simple fall, Dr. Lee, perhaps counterintuitively, asserted just the opposite, saying that there was way too much blood on and around the staircase for it to have been a beating. Dr. Lee said, too much blood spatter. In an ordinary beating case, you don't have that much blood splatter. And as for those suspicious observations the police and EMTs made about the victim's blood being already dry by the time they arrived, on cross-examination, the same prosecution witnesses conceded they really hadn't looked at the blood all that closely at the time. Rudolph says, in fact, the first police through the door may have had it out for Michael Peterson from the start because they were angry at the regular pot shots he was taking at them in his newspaper column. And in this column, Peterson accused them of only solving a small fraction of the crimes and not getting a handle on drug trafficking in the city. And so maybe this was payback time, is what the defense attorney is saying. So Rudolph says it wasn't that hard for them to look at the blood and assume the worst about Michael Peterson. And for all their measuring and collecting evidence at the scene, defense attorney Rudolph had a Perry Mason moment up his sleeve about a huge clue the police missed altogether. The defense expert witness, Dr. Henry Lee, the medical examiner of the O.J. case fame, had told the jury that copious blood splatter on the back of the staircase convinced him that Kathleen Peterson had died of a fall and not a beating. Dr. Lee, it turned out, wasn't the only echo of the Simpson trial. Defense attorney Rudolph was about to take on the competency of the police, just as the Dream Team lawyers had, right? The defense started by going after the supervising officer for letting unauthorized traffic into the crime scene. So Rudolph said, you were a little concerned about who all these people were at the scene, weren't you? And Detective Borden said yes. The defense wouldn't challenge the cops on what they didn't do in the Peterson house in the wee hours as family, neighbors, and paramedics converged on the back staircase. Rudolph said the police didn't tape off the area of the stairwell until 3:34 a.m., almost an hour after the call came in, and by then it was just too late. The blood in the area had been completely altered. The scene at the house had been completely contaminated. No, the truth of the matter was it was not preserved at all for about an hour. Peterson's lawyers had criticized what they called sloppy police procedures from day one. Why did the cops allow Peterson to step in and embrace the body of his dead wife? And why did they let Peterson's son, Todd, who'd arrived at the house shortly after the paramedics, walk to the kitchen to get a soda, transferring blood as well? Rudolph said, Michael goes up to Kathleen with the police watching, and he hugs her. Todd takes him, puts him on the couch where there's blood transfer, and then Todd says, can I get some soda and a glass? And the police say, sure. And here goes Todd, walking around the kitchen with blood on his hands. Remember the first responders at the house said traces of blood here and there beyond the stairwell itself had made them suspicious, didn't look right? Rudolph said, when you went into the kitchen area there, you noticed some blood, I think you said, on a kitchen cabinet? Worden said yes, but under cross-examination, the police investigator who declared the house a crime scene admitted he had been unaware of people traipsing in and out like Peterson's son. And then Rudolph said, of course you didn't know anything about Todd Peterson being permitted to go get a soda in a glass and that sort of thing. And Borden said, no, I did not. I was not aware of that. And Rudolph said, and you have been aware, and had you been aware of that, that might have at least factored into your thinking about how suspicious that blood was? And Borden says, yes, you're right. I agree with you. Rudolph said, the blood in the kitchen area, for example, was a complete irrelevancy once you established there was contamination there in the kitchen with the police standing right by. And, it became a defense theme. Things that looked suspicious at first were not so suspicious now. On closer examination, they turned out to be sloppy police work. Now, the testimony of the police investigator who thought there was something suspicious about how Kathleen Peterson's body had come so neatly to rest in the stairwell, her head and neck aligned straight up and down with her spine, the officer conceded under defense cross-examination that he made that judgment before learning the husband had cradled his wife's body and placed her down as police watched. Borden said, I have no knowledge of that. And Rudolph said, and of course, that info would have been helpful to you in determining whether or not that was really a red flag now, wouldn't it? And Borden said that information would have been helpful. But the biggest lapse of the police, as the defense saw it, was going to allow defense attorney Rudolph to dress up his case with a showy flourish. All along, the prosecution had insisted that the murder weapon used to bludgeon Kathleen Peterson was a metal fireplace tool called a Blo-poke. More than 30 police officers had scoured the Peterson house and grounds, but they never found it. There had been ominous testimony from Kathleen's sister that the Blo-poke she'd always seen in the kitchen by the back staircase was missing, the suggestion being that Michael Peterson made murderous use of it. And then he hid it someplace in the 2+ hours before he had called 911. Now, in one last big swing for the fences to make the police look inept and clueless and therefore unreliable, the defense called to the stand the state's lead police investigator. Attorney Rudolph had something to show the detective. It was a moment out of Perry Mason. What was labeled Exhibit 280 was nothing less than the missing Blo-poke, the state's alleged murder weapon, an undamaged old fireplace tool with only a tip missing at the end. Rudolph said, "That 280, that's a Blo-poke, isn't it? Is that what it appears to be?" Detective said, "Appears to be a Blo-poke." Rudolph said, "If we look at the handle, for example, it's pretty much the same thing, right?" Because he's showing it against the one that he brought in already. And detective says, "Appears to be." And Rudolph said, that doesn't appear to you to be mangled, does it?" And detective said, "No, it's not mangled, no sir." And Rudolph said, "It's not even dented, is it? See any dents? Even a tiny indentation?" And detective said, "It doesn't appear to have any dents in it." Rudolph said, "Do you know where this Exhibit 280, where it's been for the last 20 months? Detective said, "No, I do not." And he said, "In the Peterson garage, that's where." The defense attorney claimed it had been found there days before. And this part you can see in the documentary when they find this thing, because they call the defense attorney back from going to play golf, and they find this thing like against a wall, cobwebs. There's even a little dried, like little worm on it, and you can see it. It's just been there, and they were having this discussion about whether they wanted to bring this in or not. And one of the sons said something like, "Dad, tell me if this is even a chance of something being on this. Tell me, I'll go get rid of it. I'll throw it in some lake or something." But they ended up bringing it in. They gathered it up. They put it in this glass tube, and they brought it in, and they passed this around the jury. They passed so much bloody stuff around in here, and then all those people going into that bloody house. I could never have been on that jury. I couldn't have been. You should have seen when Dr. Henry Lee went to the house, they had the blood still on the stairwell, okay? Nobody ever cleaned it up. So the whole family's living there with all that blood, and then Dr. Henry Lee is laying all over it. The defense attorney's laying all over it, trying to show different positions. I was so skeeved out with all of that. And then the passing around, if they were passing that stuff to me, oh, here, this might be the murder weapon. Here, grab a hold of it, just, but no, that's okay. I can see it good from right there. Yeah, that would have just triggered all of my OCD and all of my germophobness. I'd have to be excused from that. Yeah, that was really gross. And then they're like, they're holding the bloody clothes, and that was another thing they brought in on the appeal because the defense attorney didn't even put gloves on when he was holding it. He's putting it all over the witness stand. So this defense attorney claims it had been found just days before, covered with cobwebs and dead insects, implying that police and everyone else had overlooked it. Not hidden, said the defense, because it had never been a murder weapon in the first place. And, Rudolph says, does this appear to you 280 to be the Blo-poke that Mr. Hardin has been talking about that's mysteriously missing since this trial began? Rudolph said, there's no smoke and mirrors about that. This was the Blo-poke. Well, if it is, then what was the murder weapon? Lawyer Dave Rudolph thought he'd peppered reasonable doubt all the way through the state's circumstantial case. From the blood work that described a fall as persuasively as a bludgeoning, to the marital perfect storm that wasn't, and the murder weapon, not missing at all, and was no more than a dusty fireplace tool. Peterson's lawyer elected not to put him on the stand. But maybe as important as any of the evidence his team put on was the sight of one of the writer's 2 boys and the adopted daughters Martha and Margaret sitting prominently in support of him throughout the gruesome testimony. But the prosecution wasn't done yet, not by a long shot. The judge had just made a ruling that was going to allow the jury to hear something absolutely flabbergasting. Wait till you hear this. We're not done with the twists. Something that had occurred 4,000 miles away almost 20 years earlier in Germany, in a suburb of Frankfurt, 4,000 miles from Durham County Courthouse. It's the unlikely place where the focus of this trial has now turned. Okay? The judge, in the middle of the trial, mid-trial in the Peterson case, was listening to arguments on whether to allow the jury to hear about something that happened in the defendant's life 20 years earlier in Germany. In the light of what took place in North Carolina, something so unlikely that you couldn't get quoted odds on it ever occurring twice to one man. The bizarre story begins in the early 80s at America's Air Base in Germany, at the time a busy intersection in the Cold War. Among the U.S. citizens living around the base was Michael Peterson. His then wife and their boys were living there, and she taught American school there. Peterson and his wife became fast friends with another teacher, a woman named Elizabeth Ratliff, and her husband, a career Air Force officer. Elizabeth Ratliff's sister, Margaret, recalled those days. Margaret Blair, Elizabeth Ratliff's sister, said they took family trips together all the time. They had dinner at each other's houses. And then one day, Elizabeth Ratliff's husband was killed while on a secret assignment. The widow was left alone with her 2 young daughters. The Petersons took her under their wing, Michael Peterson becoming almost a stand-in dad and father. On November 24th, 1985, on a night like so many others, Elizabeth and her 2 girls had gone over to the Petersons for dinner. Later, Michael Peterson drove the widow and her daughters home. He helped put the girls to bed. The next morning, Elizabeth's sister, back in the States, got the dreadful call. She said that she got a call that said, "There's been an accident. Your sister fell down the stairs and died." Okay, so he has another staircase incident in his life, right? Authorities arrived and discovered Elizabeth Ratliff face down at the bottom of the stairs. There was an official finding that she died of a spontaneous intracranial hemorrhage, a stroke, natural causes. Her sister said at the point, there were gut feelings like something's not right, but we didn't find out until later that something was very wrong. The dead woman's will designated the Petersons as the legal guardians of her 2 daughters. Not long after, Michael Peterson, his wife, and now 4 children moved back to the States, to North Carolina. Fast forward 16 years to December 2001, and then of course comes the bombshell, another dreadful phone call, and an eerie echo not to be believed, right? This happening 2 times to the same guy? Kind of strange, right? It's almost like, okay, well, he had something to do with this one, and it worked out okay, and he got away with it, right? So, could he do it again? Probably. He's a writer, so he's got this creative brain. He's going to stage this scene, and he's smarter than everybody else, kind of thing, right? Okay, so now when this happened in 2001, when this sister got a call, it came from Elizabeth, her sister's grown daughter, giving her aunt the news that her adoptive mother, who adopted her after her birth mother died, was now found dead at the bottom of the stairs. And Elizabeth's sister said that she answered the phone. She said, "Margaret, what's wrong?" And Margaret said, "Kathleen's dead. She fell down the stairs. She had an accident. She fell down the stairs and Dad found her." And the sister said, "Oh my God, Margaret, do you know what you're saying?" She said the same thing happened to, and she cut me off and she said, "I know." The sister of the woman in Germany felt she had no choice but to pick up the phone and talk to the detective working on the Kathleen Peterson case. She said, she told them, "Are you aware the same thing happened to Margaret and Martha's mother, and Michael Peterson was the last one to be with her?" Detective Art Holland did not know that. Detective Holland said he was overwhelmed with, I have 2 cases. 2 women that are dead, 2 women that appear to die the same way, 2 women that are associated with Michael Peterson. Lightning doesn't strike the same place twice. The detective huddled with the prosecutor's office, and a decision was made to investigate anew the death of Elizabeth Ratliff, who died 16 years before in another country. Her body had been brought back to Texas, where she was buried. And now, at the urging of authorities in Durham, the dead woman's sisters agreed to exhume her body. Detective Holland said they didn't feel comfortable with her cause of death the way it was ruled in 1985. Detective Holland, a 22-year veteran, said the Peterson case was suddenly exposing him to a wider world than just Durham County, so he made arrangements in Texas to recover Elizabeth Ratliff's burial vault. And in April 2003, in Bay City, Texas, south of Houston, the remains of Elizabeth Ratliff, the one-time friend and neighbor of Michael Peterson, the mother of his 2 adopted daughters, was exhumed, was placed under Detective Holland's guard. The body was driven to North Carolina and taken to the medical examiner's office, where it would be studied by the same medical examiner who ruled Kathleen Peterson's death a homicide. There was going to be a chance that if they exhumed this body and then it was indeed found to be an accidental death, that it wouldn't help their case. But the detective said, he had to take the risk. It just needed to be done. So he actually watched this process through a morgue window as the medical examiner prepared her tools and then began looking closely at the injuries of the head of the woman from Germany. And she was finding lacerations, deep injuries to the scalp, 7 of them. Detective Holland said as he was watching this, he thought that his case was getting a whole lot better. Detective Holland said the medical examiner found that she had multiple lacerations to her head that were consistent with blunt force trauma. It was not a cerebral hemorrhage, but she had been bludgeoned to death. That was exactly the news that the medical examiner believed Elizabeth Ratliff to be a homicide victim. That was a deep shock to her sister up in Rhode Island. Detective Holland had called right away and spoken to her sister. And he told her, "Are you sitting down? Because your sister didn't fall down the stairs. This just opened up all the questions that her sister had that were never answered." So now there were 2 women in Michael Peterson's life. that were both found in a puddle of blood, in a pool of blood at the bottom of the stairs, and both are now deemed a homicide. Eerily similar circumstances, but was there any evidence to link the earlier death to Peterson? The pressure was on investigators. The trial date was only a month away when Detective Holland took the second plane ride of his life, this time to Germany. And there he inspected the staircase where Ratliff died. He talked to one-time neighbors and reviewed what little official German paperwork there was on the death. And then he flew back home to North Carolina. But were any of the detectives' findings and suspicions about what might have happened in Germany years ago admissible in this case of Kathleen Peterson? For months, there was courthouse buzz about whether the prosecutor would even get to try this mysterious Elizabeth Ratliff story heard by the jury. In the end, the state decided to go with it. So they let them bring it in. And the prosecutor said that, it was decided there was sufficient similarities and it was admissible. The prosecution said they felt very strongly that there was solid legal ground to introduce it, and the defense naturally tried to block any testimony about another dead woman on a staircase, of course. Defense attorney Dave Rudolph said, "I still think legally it was irrelevant." Really, Dave? The trial judge agreed with the state's motions to admit testimony about the death years ago in Germany. The story of Elizabeth Ratliff would be recounted for the jury, almost as a little mini trial in a trial. Okay? So the state hoped to prove more than just a little creepy coincidence. Okay? They're proving that, come on now, you really don't think this is a coincidence now, do you? So Hardin said they felt like it was his blueprint. Okay? He had seen it, been involved with it in Germany. I had to use my laptop tonight because my computer, my printer ran out of ink. And so I had to bring my laptop up here, and then forgot to plug in the power cord, so then it just died in the middle of that. Now it's updating Office. So, okay, so while that's coming up, we can ramble for a bit here. Somebody responded to one of my comments that, oh, Cans is the girlfriend, and she's a very nice woman. And I said, how do you know she's a very nice woman? Because you heard her on some podcast. Was that what you've got there? I said, I can have someone on that says that she's an ex-girlfriend. We should do that. We should have someone call in and just show how easy it is to have someone pretend that they're an ex-girlfriend, because that this ex-girlfriend was unable to provide any proof, even in their own group, even in the group that podcaster runs. People were asking this person, this Cans, for proof, anything, okay, just anything that would show you truly had a relationship with Chris Watts, other than, just repeating information that's out there, okay? She could not do it. She came, said, why does she have to do this and all this jazz, couldn't produce anything. Believe me, she's not the ex-girlfriend, that's Bruce, and it's so easy to perpetrate, the way that was done. She said nothing, not a shred of anything, or things should over to extrapolation. Anybody could do that. Study the timeline, say you're the ex-girlfriend during that timeline, that you met him at such and such a time, and then just, use whatever information to your benefit. I don't know if she replied to me. You guys can check it out if she did, because I left her a message. So you've given me, like I said, there's a lot of cases to check out. Now, this case is probably going to have to be in a couple of parts, because the verdict on the first trial, then there's an appeal, and so there's more to the story. Tonight, we're going to be just going through this first trial to the verdict, and then we can open it up to more what their theories were. We could talk about this owl theory that was just crazy, and different things. They didn't even show the owl theory in the Staircase docuseries because it was just so ridiculous. Okay, I found it. Now let me get back to, Let me get back to the place that I was at. We've got to talk more about his sons that were in trouble, and wait till you hear what There are so many different facets to this case that this, again, is just getting you the basics, getting through the trial, and then we'll go through a lot of interesting things in here. Because in the docuseries, it doesn't tell you what the boys were in trouble for. But one of his sons had a little stint in the federal prison. So, you know, interesting facts intertwined in this case. Okay, so Hardin said, we felt that this was the blueprint. He had seen it, been involved with it in Germany. He knew what had to happen for it to look like, feel like, and persuade people that it was an accident because it had happened before. And that's what I said, okay? He was familiar with this. He was comfortable with this accident, and he already had a lot of confidence because he had gotten away with it before, so he could stage that again and collect on that $1.8 million life insurance policy that would end his woes. Now, I will show you emails to the contrary of what the defense is stating, that they didn't have any financial issues. They most certainly did. And that all is intertwined within his kids' legal battles, their debt, and college tuition. So, you know, it didn't matter if this happened in Germany, this was relevant to the case. The eyewitnesses to the death scene in Germany were about to tell what they saw that day and could never forget. Blood splattered up the stairwell, so much like that bloody staircase out in Durham, North Carolina. Kathleen Peterson dead at the bottom of one in North Carolina, and Elizabeth Ratcliffe dead on the bottom of another one in Germany. Both women part of Michael Peterson's life, both women where Michael Peterson was the last person to see them alive. Now it was eerily as though the murder trial in North Carolina was continuing, with a substitute victim, the neighbor and friend, standing in for the wife. The state drew up just short of accusing Michael Peterson of murder in Germany years ago by the same MO, a bludgeoning homicide disguised as a fall down the stairs. Jim Hardin, prosecutor, said, what we wanted to show were the similarities. The scene was very, very similar to what was found in Kathleen's case. So just as he'd done in setting the scene in the house where Kathleen Peterson died, the prosecutor led a parade of witnesses through their stories about what they saw and heard in November of 1985 at the residence in Germany. The victim's nanny took the stand and testified about making the awful discovery. The nanny is the one that discovered the body, okay, when she came to work the next morning. So the prosecutor asks her, once you put your key in the door and opened it, what happened next? She said, I see all the lights are on and I see this bloody body lying there. She didn't know whether the woman was dead or alive. She ran upstairs, she told the court, to grab the phone to call the Petersons and to call the Petersons for help, but the line was dead. At first she wasn't even sure the person on the stairs was her boss, Liz, but when the nanny came back downstairs, there was no doubt. The former nanny said, I see that these boots and feet were Liz's. The body was Liz's on the stairs. She had boots on. And the prosecutor said, were they a specific type of boot? She said they were a snow boot. Snow boots that Elizabeth routinely took off and left by the front door. Why was she still wearing them in the house? The state was implying that Michael Peterson had killed the woman before she had a chance to remove them. Okay, so the former nanny ran down the street to get Michael Peterson, and she remembers him coming back to the house and taking charge. She said that he said she was dead, and the nanny said, no, I felt her, she is warm. And he said, she's not warm, Barbara. And he took her by the arm, she said, and he was like, Barbara, she's not warm, it's the heat from the floor. She's dead. Soon after, the German police showed up, and Michael Peterson explained to them what likely had happened. The nanny said Michael was speaking to the authorities, he was telling them that there had been an accident. Now came the payoff for the prosecution. Elizabeth's friends from Germany testifying to what they saw that day at the bottom of the stairs. Vivid memories, so like testimony already heard by the jury in Kathleen Peterson's death. Suspicious-looking bloodstain stories. Surely the jury couldn't miss how eerily similar these eyewitness testimonies were from Germany, and how similar they were to the ones, told about the Kathleen Peterson scene. An otherwise healthy woman, dead at the bottom of a staircase, pooled in blood, but unlike the authorities in North Carolina, the German officials didn't question the amount of blood. They accepted the theory of the friend, Michael Peterson, that the woman had died in a fall. Very little investigation was done, and the death was ruled the result of natural causes. The prosecution called this U.S. Army pathologist who performed the autopsy on Ratliff in Germany years before, and he testified that he did see lacerations on the back of her head, but determined that the woman died of a cerebral hemorrhage, partly because authorities did not think that there had been any foul play. Authorities in Germany felt that the most likely scenario was that Ratliff had blacked out and fell down the stairs, causing the lacerations. The prosecutor asked, "How many did you locate on Mrs. Ratliff's head?" And the pathologist said, "More than 4. The prosecutor said, "Could there have been as many as 7? And the pathologist said, "Yes." That's another weird parallel, 7 lacerations, exactly the same number that the medical examiner had found on the scalp of Kathleen Peterson. The medical examiner who studied the exhumed body of the woman from Germany told the jury what she found: homicide. Homicide of the mother of the 2 women sitting in the court of their stepfather, Michael Peterson. It was industrial strength innuendo that Peterson was somehow involved in the homicide of Elizabeth Ratliff without actually accusing him or suggesting a motive as to why he wanted the family friend dead. The defense was going to refute the testimony by arguing coincidence, but so what? No biggie. Coincidence happens all the time. Even if Elizabeth Ratliff had died from a fall down the stairs in Germany in 1985, is that such an amazing coincidence? Dave Rudolph said. Falling down the stairs as a cause of death is a heck of a lot more common, for example, than drowning. Weird things happen all the time, he argued. The evidence will show that Michael Peterson had no reason to hurt Elizabeth Ratliff and didn't. What we have, we contend, and we will show you, is a false coincidence. The defense responded to the new charge as it had with Kathleen Peterson by calling in its own expert, the same neuropathologist who testified earlier, and the expert said he thought German authorities got it right the first time. Elizabeth Ratliff did die of a cerebral hemorrhage, a stroke. Rudolph asked, "Is the blood in all of the ventricles of the brain consistent with a stroke from natural causes?" And the expert said, "It is consistent." That close friend of Elizabeth Ratliff, who testified so forcefully about the memories of blood splatter up the staircase wall on cross-examination by the defense, added some perhaps important detail about the dead woman. The friend recalled she complained of not feeling well in the days leading up to her death. The defense asked, "Shortly before she died, you talked with Liz and she talked to you about suffering some severe headaches?" And the woman said, "Liz looked very bad. She was pale. She looked bad. And she held her head like this. And I asked her what was wrong, and she said that she had the most severe headache and that she did make an appointment to go to the medical facility, and she had an appointment Tuesday." And the defense said, "The following week?" And she said, "Yes." And the defense said, "And she never got to see the doctor?" The witness said, "No." The defense that had accused the police officers in North Carolina of misunderstanding and failing to preserve the crime scene had nothing but confidence in the work of the German and U.S. authorities in Germany. The defense questioned this former U.S. military authority who had been dispatched to the scene there, and the defense elected not to quiz the nanny about what she saw that morning in Germany because Attorney Rudolph believed her account spoke to Peterson's non-involvement in the death. The evidence was that when the nanny found her at 8 o'clock in the morning, her body was still warm. It was not stiff, there was no rigor, and a telephone that she only brought into the bedroom when she went to sleep at night was there in the bedroom. Therefore, reasoned the defense, the phone in the bedroom proved that Elizabeth Ratliff had went to bed that night. Whatever happened to her didn't happen that night. All of the evidence was, if there was a homicide, it was in the morning, not the night before. Not when Michael Peterson was there. He was at his wife's side, in his bed at home that night. In the end, the defense treated the death in Germany as, granted, maybe a weird coincidence, but legally here, now in Durham, North Carolina, it's completely irrelevant. Still, how many guys have two women in their lives dead at the bottom of a staircase? Not too many. It was a question of relevance for the jury, which was about to get the case involving Michael Peterson's dead wife. It was a question of relevance for the jury, which was about to get the case involving Michael Peterson's dead wife. Was he a fiendish killer or a grieving husband? Is he wrongfully accused? Well, now it's time for this jury to decide. In final arguments, the prosecutor had one last chance to convince the jury beyond a reasonable doubt that Kathleen Peterson did not die in an accidental fall. So the prosecutor says, how in the world can someone get 38 injuries all over their face, back, head, arms, and wrists by falling down some stairs, even if there were two separate falls? There is absolutely no way that makes common sense. The defense's last argument was the real issue, the one that you need to focus on, is whether the state has proven beyond a reasonable doubt, with proof that fully satisfies and entirely convinces you, that on the morning of December 9th, 2001, Michael Peterson beat Kathleen Peterson to death with a blow-poke in that narrow stairway that you saw weeks ago. That's it. That's the issue. After more than 3.5 months of trial, the jurors would finally decide the fate of Michael Peterson. 4 days after getting the case, the jury announced it had reached a verdict. The jury was coming in. They had the verdict. Pagers and cell phones summoned the prosecution and defense back into the courtroom. The judge called the clerk to read the verdict to a hushed courtroom. Guilty. Michael Peterson, guilty of bashing his wife about the head and letting her slowly bleed to death. The judge asked him if he wished to say anything. Peterson turned and mouthed a silent message to each of his children. He told them it was going to be okay. And then he began life as a convict. Peterson's family sat stunned. The daughters were silently sobbing when the verdict was read. Margaret and Martha Ratliff, two young women who lost so much in their lives. They lost both of their blood parents. They lost their stepmother, Kathleen. Well, she's their adoptive mother. I don't know why they keep calling her stepmother. Their adoptive mother, Kathleen, and now their adoptive father was going away forever. During the course of the investigation and trial, the Ratliff girls had become estranged from other family members, their aunts, Kathleen's sisters, who believed Peterson was guilty, and the little girl down the street they used to play with, who had become their stepsister, Caitlin. They hadn't spoken to her in more than a year. Michael Peterson was now the uncrossable divide between them, and asserting her father's innocence to the cameras where he was indicted. After asserting her father's innocence to the cameras when he was indicted, Caitlin, like the jury, had not been able to get past the autopsy photos and report, and when she first read it, she called her stepsister, Margaret, immediately. And she said to her, "You need to read this. You need to understand that Mom she did not die from falling down the stairs, and she was beaten to death." The sisters never spoke again. Caitlin had all her belongings removed from the house. Caitlin said, "I've lost obviously far more than just my mother. I did lose my family and my home." And when asked if she believed that Michael Peterson beat her mother to death, Caitlin said, "Yes, I absolutely do. There's no doubt in my mind." And when asked to think what could have happened that night to cause that, Caitlin said, "I truly think it was a culmination of a storm." It truly was a storm that raged through that mansion on Cedar Street and swept away all it found there. Love and a sense of family was displaced forever by shame and a gaping horror. Michael Peterson appealed his conviction. His lawyers argued that testimony about the death of Elizabeth Ratliff in Germany should not have been allowed into evidence. In September, a North Carolina court rejected that appeal. I'm going to just tell you about these theories that the defense had here, okay? The owl theory was advanced to the defendant's lawyers and the prosecution as the conclusion of the trial, namely that Mrs. Peterson may have been the victim of an attack by a wild bird outside, which caused puncture wounds to her elbows, injuries on her face and around her eyes, and lacerations to her scalp. The theory was dismissed at the time on the basis that owls do not attack human beings, and that theory lacked credibility. A blood expert, Don Deaver, conducted blood spatter analysis in the Peterson case and had a crime scene investigation career that spanned nearly 25 years. But in 2011, Deaver was fired from the Bureau after a series of messy court cases, including the exoneration of Greg Taylor, who spent 19 years in prison for a murder he did not commit. Deaver failed to report the results of blood tests that would have been helpful to Taylor. In 2011, Judge Orlando Hudson ruled that Deaver misled the jury in the Peterson case, one of the reasons cited for vacating the murder verdict. Two other renowned experts reviewed everything Deaver did, Hardin said. They differed in a few minor areas, but in terms of his core opinions, they came up with the same conclusion, Hardin said. Hardin said he decided not to call those experts because he thought it would strain the jury after days of Deaver's testimony. Let's see here. So with that, they were able to get him out, okay? So he came out on that. He was under house arrest, and then he had to decide whether he was going to go for another trial or he's going to take this Alfred plea deal. And we can go into that in another portion of this. I'll continue this, but that's what I'm going to do for now. So we'll go into the kids' trouble they had, because the kids had trouble, his boys especially, and we'll get into how we know that Michael really had money troubles as opposed to what the defense is saying, and just where he was looking for money, because there's a lot of interesting things in here. Then we'll look more at the series and what the series left out. So there'll be at least a few videos on this case, but I want to just get that out right now. Let's discuss what's going on here. What do you think about this? Do you think he murdered both women? Sound in on this, and I will talk to you guys very soon. I have to go, and we will talk again very soon on this case. I hope that you guys have a good, whether it's day, morning, or night where you are, whatever it is, I will talk to you soon. Bye-bye now.